Sarah was on her third cup of coffee when her phone rang, and she almost didn't answer it. That was the thing about Tuesdays. They had a particular kind of weight, not the fresh dread of Monday, not the relief of Friday, just the grey, grinding middle of a week that felt identical to every week before it. She was 41 years old, sitting at a desk covered in files she hadn't opened, in an office she'd stopped noticing years ago. The call was from an unknown number with a Vermont area code. She picked up because she had nothing better to do. The man on the other end introduced himself as Gerald Marsh, an attorney based in Burlington. He spoke carefully, the way lawyers do when they've delivered difficult news so many times it has become a kind of practiced gentleness. He told her that her father, Raymond Calloway, had passed away 11 days ago. Cardiac arrest. He was found by a neighbor. Sarah said nothing for a long moment. 19 years. That was how long it had been since she'd heard his name spoken out loud by anyone who knew him. 19 years since he had existed in her life as anything other than an absence she had learned, slowly and painfully, to stop feeling. Marsh explained that Raymond had left a will. Simple, 1 page. The entirety of his estate, a cabin in northern Vermont, 12 acres, and whatever was inside, belonged to her. Her first thought was to sell it. Her second thought was the same. She asked if there was anything else she should know. There was a pause. Brief. Almost nothing. No, Marsh said. That's everything. He said it too quickly, and Sarah, who had spent her career reading people, heard exactly what he didn't say. She sat with the phone in her hand. Long after Marsh had hung up, Raymond Calloway. She turned the name over in her mind, the way you turn over something found at the bottom of a drawer. Familiar enough to recognize, strange enough to make you wonder how it got there. Her memories of him were not dramatic. That was the cruelest part. There was no single terrible moment she could point to, no explosion that explained the crater he left. There was just a man who was always slightly elsewhere, present at the dinner table but looking past it, laughing at something only he could hear. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, effortlessly and therefore unreliably. People liked Raymond immediately. Keeping him was a different problem entirely. She remembered his hands, large, careful hands that could fix almost anything mechanical. She remembered him teaching her to ride a bike on a Sunday morning, patient in a way he rarely was, and thinking that maybe this was the version of him that would stay. It wasn't. He was gone before she turned 12. No argument. No farewell. Just a gradual thinning, then nothing. Her mother never offered an explanation worth keeping. The subject closed like a door, and in their house, closed doors stayed closed. So Sarah had built the only story available to her. He was selfish. He was broken. He was not worth the grief. She had believed that for 29 years. She wasn't sure she believed it anymore. She told herself it was practical. Someone had to assess the property before it could be listed, and that someone, apparently, was her. She left before dawn on a Thursday, coffee in the cup holder, Marsh's hand-drawn directions on the passenger seat, because her GPS, he had warned her, would stop being useful about 40 minutes before she arrived. That turned out to be an understatement. The signal dropped somewhere outside of Johnson, and after that it was just her, the directions, and the road narrowing incrementally, as though the landscape itself was trying to discourage her. The highway became a state route. The state route became a county road. The county road became a dirt track swallowed on both sides by tree line so dense the afternoon light came through in fragments. She slowed to a crawl, gravel clicking against the undercarriage, branches brushing the mirrors. And then the cabin appeared. It emerged from the tree line the way certain things do. Not dramatically, but inevitably, as if it had always been just behind the edge of what was visible. It was smaller than she'd imagined and more weathered. The porch sagged on one side. Moss had claimed the north-facing roof. The forest pressed against it from 3 directions, patient and indifferent, taking back inches every season. She sat in the idling car for a full minute. Then she got out. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and cold air, and something underneath both. Pine resin, maybe, or the particular stillness of a place that had been holding its breath for a long time. She moved through it methodically, the way she moved through most things. Living area, kitchen, single bedroom, old furniture solidly built, a wood stove with a neat stack of split logs beside it, hunting gear hung by the door, boots, a vest, a rifle she didn't touch, canned goods in the kitchen cupboard, organized by type. Whatever Raymond was, he wasn't careless, the electricity worked. That was the first thing that snagged her attention. Not just connected, recently paid. The account was current through the end of the month. The calendar on the wall stopped at February. Not October, the month he died. February, 8 months earlier. She stood in front of it longer than made sense, trying to find the innocent explanation. Then she noticed the mugs, 2 of them, side by side on the drying rack. Clean, dried completely. Not left by accident, placed there deliberately, together, the way you set things when you expect to use them again. She turned slowly and looked down the short hallway toward the back of the cabin. The last door had a padlock on it. Heavy, external, the kind meant to keep something in as much as out. She checked every hook, every drawer, every surface she could find. No key, nothing. She was on the porch with her second coffee when the truck came down the dirt track, moving slowly, the way people drive when they already know where they're going. An elderly couple. He was tall and deliberate in his movements, the kind of man built by decades of physical work. She carried a covered dish with both hands and was already smiling before she'd fully stepped out of the truck. They introduced themselves as Walt and Lorraine Hester from the farm about a mile east. They'd seen the light on the night before and figured someone had finally come. They had known Raymond. That much was clear from the first sentence. Not known of him, known him. Walt talked about the winter 2 years back, when the tractor seized up, and Raymond had appeared the next morning with tools and stayed until it ran. Lorraine mentioned Thanksgiving twice, said he brought the same bottle of wine both times, and apologized for it like it was a personal failing. They spoke of him the way people speak of someone genuinely missed. Then Lorraine looked at her and asked how exactly she knew Raymond. "He was my father," Sarah said. The silence that followed was brief but complete. Walt and Lorraine exchanged a glance, not unkind, but unguarded. They hadn't known he had a daughter. In 12 years of neighborly friendship, Raymond had spoken of family in the vague, fond way of someone protecting something tender. He had never once said her name. She found the key on her second full day, and she didn't find it by accident. She had been working methodically through the cabin, the way you do when a question won't leave you alone. She checked behind frames, inside boots, beneath the wood stove's iron lip. It was only when she crouched under the kitchen sink to check the pipe connections that she noticed it, a board slightly proud of the others, its edge worn smooth in a way that suggested handling. She pressed it. It gave, and there, in a shallow hollow no wider than a hand, was a single key on a plain ring. It had been placed. She was certain of that. Not hidden to be kept secret, but hidden to be found by someone patient enough, someone who cared enough to look. The padlock opened on the first try. The room was an office. That was the only word for it. Floor-to-ceiling shelving on 2 walls, lined with binders arranged by year. A desk, heavy and deliberate, with a single locked drawer. And across from the door, taking up most of the wall, a corkboard dense with photographs, documents, and handwritten notes connected by lines she couldn't yet read. She stepped closer to the photographs. Most were landscapes, some were strangers, And then, near the center, slightly overlapping another image as though added later, was the photograph of a young girl standing outside a red brick building, backpack on, looking at something off to the left. Sarah recognized the building immediately, her elementary school. She recognized the girl. She was 7 years old in that photograph, and she had never seen it before in her life. She pulled the first binder from the shelf the way you pull a thread when you already sense, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that the whole thing is going to unravel. It was labeled with a year, the year she turned 8. Inside, in Raymond's careful handwriting, were financial records she didn't immediately understand, account numbers, transfers, notes in the margins cross-referencing other binders. She pulled the next one, and the next. An hour passed without her noticing. The binders were not about Raymond, they were about her family. School reports, somehow obtained, covering years of her academic life. Her name on every page, her grades, her teachers' comments, preserved in plastic sleeves as though they were legal documents. Birthday cards, written in full and never sent, stacked in chronological order inside a folder marked simply with her name. Medical records she had no idea he could have accessed. He had been building something, a parallel record of a life he was not permitted to be part of. And then she found the binder at the end of the second shelf, thicker than the others, tabbed and cross-referenced with a precision that felt different, urgent, almost desperate. It was a legal record, an investigation, fraud spanning nearly a decade, involving the diversion of funds from a family estate. The kind of thing that destroys reputations, ends careers, and in certain circumstances leads to prison. The name that appeared throughout the documents, again and again, as the primary subject of the investigation was her uncle, her mother's brother, a man she had known her entire life as decent, reliable, and quietly prosperous. Raymond had not left. Raymond had been removed. The desk drawer had its own key, smaller than the first, taped to the underside of the center drawer, where someone would only find it if they were already looking. Inside were letters, not a few, dozens, bundled by decade with rubber bands that had dried and cracked with age. Each envelope was addressed in Raymond's handwriting, sealed and stamped. None had ever been mailed. She sat down on the floor of that small room, back against the desk, and began to read. He wrote to her on every birthday. He wrote when she graduated high school, a letter that described, with an accuracy that made her chest tighten, the yellow dress she had worn that day. He wrote the week she got married, a letter that began with an apology and ended with something so close to a blessing that she had to set it down and breathe before she could continue. He knew. He had always known, not from a distance of indifference, but from the painful, deliberate distance of someone who had been told, in terms he understood to be non-negotiable, that proximity would cost more than he could ask anyone else to pay. The legal binder had outlined the fraud. A separate document, folded inside the final letter, outlined the agreement, informal, unwritten in any official sense, but clear. Raymond's silence in exchange for the family's protection. If he spoke, her mother's small business, built during the years he was absent, built on loans partially tied to her brother's finances, would not survive the scrutiny that followed. He had not chosen to disappear. He had chosen them over himself, in the only way left available to him. The letters were the only record he had ever existed as a father at all. She called her mother from the porch, because she couldn't make herself stay inside that room any longer. It was early evening. The tree line had gone dark, and the sky above it was the deep, specific blue that comes just before stars appear. She listened to it ring and thought about hanging up. She didn't. Her mother answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that particular careful warmth she used when she already sensed trouble coming. Sarah didn't ease into it. She told her about the binders, the letters, the legal documents. The name that appeared on every page of the fraud investigation, the silence that followed, was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of someone who had been waiting for a very long time for a door they thought was locked to finally open. Her mother had not known everything. That part Sarah believed, but she had known enough. She had known that Raymond's leaving was not entirely his choice. She had known her brother's name was somewhere in the reason, and she had decided, in the particular exhausted way of someone managing too many fractures at once, that knowing the full truth would cost more than she had left to spend. She told herself Sarah was better off without the confusion of it. She told herself silence was a form of protection. She had told herself that for so long it had become indistinguishable from belief. Sarah didn't raise her voice. There was nothing in her that wanted to. She felt only the strange, heavy sorrow of watching someone you love reveal the exact size of an impossible choice they made alone in the dark decades ago. She went back to the binder that night at the desk, under the single lamp that cast the room in amber. She read slowly this time, not searching, but following, letting the documents lead her through a financial architecture that had been constructed with considerable care over nearly a decade. The fraud itself was not simple. It was the kind of thing that requires patience, access, and the particular confidence of someone who has never seriously considered being caught. Her uncle had diverted funds from a family estate during the settlement period, following her paternal grandfather's death. The mechanics were layered, routed through accounts that appeared legitimate until you mapped them against the original probate documents, which Raymond had done methodically over years. What emerged was a number, a substantial one, money that should have passed to Raymond as a primary heir. It hadn't. It had moved sideways, quietly, into structures that benefited her uncle's business interests and, indirectly, the financial stability of the broader family. She sat back and let that settle. Raymond hadn't simply been pressured into silence. He had first been stripped of the resources that would have allowed him to fight. Without that inheritance, he had no legal foundation strong enough to challenge the arrangement, no financial footing from which to pursue custody, no leverage of any kind. The fraud hadn't just stolen money. It had stolen every option he had. He hadn't been silenced the way you silence someone with a threat. He had been silenced the way you silence someone by first making sure they have nothing left to say it with. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't try. She sat at Raymond's desk with the binders open around her, and the letters stacked to one side and the lamp burning low, and she let herself stay inside the question without rushing toward an answer. That felt important. It felt like the least she could do. The documentation was thorough enough to matter. She understood that much, even without a legal background. Raymond had spent years constructing something that could withstand scrutiny, cross-referenced, sourced, annotated in the careful handwriting of a man who knew he might not be the one to present it. He had built a case for someone else to carry. He had built it for her, even if he'd never said so. She could carry it. She could take the binders to the right people and let the truth move at whatever speed truth moves when it finally gets the room it's been denied. Her uncle was in his 70s now, comfortable, respected at his church, present at every family gathering, with the easy authority of someone who has never been seriously questioned. That could change. Or she could do what her family had always done. Choose the quieter path, sell the cabin, take what remained, and let the past stay where it had always been kept, behind closed doors, in locked rooms, in letters that were never sent. She sat with both choices for a long time. Neither felt like peace. She found it because she dropped a pen. It rolled beneath the desk and she crouched to retrieve it, And that was when she saw it, a seam in the floorboards that didn't belong. Not a gap from age or settling, but a deliberate line, clean-edged, running in a rectangle just large enough to fit both hands inside. She pressed it the way she had pressed the board beneath the sink, with the particular instinct of someone who had learned, over the past several days, that this cabin rewarded patience. The panel lifted cleanly. Inside was a small metal box, unlocked, containing two things: a key, tagged with the name of a bank and a box number, and a single, folded piece of paper. She unfolded it at the desk, under the lamp, and recognized his handwriting immediately. It was addressed to her by name. Not to whom it may concern, not to my daughter, her name, Sarah. As if he had known, with a certainty that required no explanation, exactly who would be sitting in that chair. If you're reading this, you already know enough. The key is at First National Burlington. What's in the box belongs to you. It always did. I never stopped. That was all. She read it 4 times. Then she sat without moving for a long while, the note flat on the desk beneath her hands, the lamp burning steadily around her. The following morning she drove to Burlington. The box contained trust documents, 20 years in the careful making, funded quietly and consistently, from whatever Raymond had managed to build from what little remained after everything was taken. He had given her everything he had left to give. She had expected to want more than this. She had expected rage to make the decision for her to arrive like a tide and carry her towards something loud and final. It didn't. What came instead was quieter, and in its own way more deliberate. She found the original investigator through the case documents. A retired federal agent named Coburn, living outside of Montpelier. She drove to meet him on a Tuesday, the binders in a box on the back seat. He opened the door before she finished knocking, as though he had been expecting someone like her for a long time. He spent 3 hours with the documents without speaking much. When he finally looked up, he told her it was the most complete private record he had ever seen. She asked him what she should do with it. He told her that was entirely her decision. She gave her mother the letters, all of them, bundled the way Raymond had bundled them, by decade. Her mother sat at her kitchen table and read for a long time without speaking, and Sarah sat across from her and let the silence be what it needed to be. The meeting with her uncle was brief and without theater. She placed the documentation in front of him and told him what she knew. She did not raise her voice. She asked for one thing, a written acknowledgement, signed detailing what had been done to Raymond and why. He resisted. Then he didn't. The document would never be made public. But it existed now. Raymond's version of events confirmed in ink by the man who had spent decades erasing it. She did not sell the cabin. The decision came without drama, the way the truest decisions often do, not as a resolution, but as a recognition of something already settled. She called Marsh in the first week of November and told him to close the listing inquiry. He said he understood, in a tone that suggested he had expected nothing less. The repairs took 2 seasons. She was deliberate about it, hiring local, keeping what could be kept, replacing only what the winters had made genuinely unlivable. The porch was rebuilt, the roof was treated, the wood stove was cleaned and restored to full function. The office she left almost entirely untouched, the corkboard, the binders, the photograph of a 7-year-old girl outside a red brick school. Those things stayed where Raymond had placed them. The following July she brought her daughter. She was 13, at the age where everything adults do is either embarrassing or suspicious, but something about the drive up, the highway giving way to back roads, the GPS losing signal, the cabin emerging from the tree line, quieted her in a way that Sarah recognized. She told her about Raymond that evening, on the repaired porch, while the light dropped through the trees in long gold pieces. Not the absence, the man, his careful hands, the tractor he fixed without being asked, the wine he brought to Thanksgiving twice, and apologized for both times, Walt and Lorraine came for dinner. Walt told a story about Raymond and a collapsed fence and a very uncooperative goat, and everyone laughed, and the laughter sat easily in the room. Outside, the forest pressed close, patient and unhurried, the way it always had. Only now the cabin no longer felt like something forgotten. It felt like something that had simply been waiting for the right person to finally come home.